Hey guys, welcome back, it's Meg. Today we are going to be just doing a kind of second look at how Mistweaver is doing on Dragonflight Beta. We've received a couple of changes, nothing too major, but there has been some tuning as well as a couple of playstyle adjustments since the last time we did a first impressions video. One small disclaimer, I got my wisdom teeth out this week, so I was not able to participate in this week's Mythic Plus or raid testing, so this footage is from 2 weeks ago, but everything is still new enough that it is still relevant, given that everything has stayed the same mostly, and then the thundering changes are reflected in the footage as well. There's obviously going to be a lot of different points that you can move around depending on what you find that you need, whether you need more healing, more mana, more defensives. There are many choices that you can make that can cater to your playstyle more or the things that you're struggling with more, which is what's really nice about all of these trees. Occasionally I will pick up Mana Tea and I will drop Secret Infusion, but that is kind of the only thing that I am consistently changing. I could also see us taking Uplifted Spirits instead of Zen Pulse and Zen Reverberation in a couple situations where there isn't quite as much AoE damage in the dungeons like in Azure Vaults, but that's something that we will get into more as we optimize later in beta and into the first couple of weeks of live. In this dungeon we are scaled to 392. I am also using our 4-piece, so that is something to just give you a little bit of an idea of what numbers are looking like, but those will get changed. But the Vivify and the Enveloping Nerfs as well as the mana reduction is actually very positive because it will help us avoid nerfs later on, so we're not too strong when we actually have the best stats that we want and other gear. One of the hot topics has been that Vivify received a pretty significant nerf within the last couple of weeks. It was nerfed by 25% for Mistweaver. There was a couple of minor changes to Enveloping that impacted the healing, but it also reduced the mana cost, so that is all positive changes there. I honestly don't have any complaints in terms of our tuning. One of my gripes is that we are very buggy. Like for example this week Jade Bond has not been working, and that and Jade Bond and Gift of Celestials and Enveloping Breath in general has been on and off on whether or not it's working. Seems like a day-to-day basis, so it makes it a little hard to test as it's inconsistent. But in terms of actual tuning and numbers, I am actually very pleased with where we're sitting. The two exceptions are a White Tiger statue, I feel like is slightly undertuned. It could probably pull back some from where it got nerfed for 75%. We could probably see it come the other way a bit, as it is a 2-minute cooldown. It's not movable. It's a pretty big deal, and it doesn't really feel like a big deal. So I'd like that to feel a bit more like a 2-minute cooldown, something a little bit more impactful, something that I don't straight up forget about half the time. Just because I don't look at a pack and go, oh, White Tiger is going to be great there, because it either will not live long enough or White Tiger will just not do more than Spinning Crane Kick. So if it had a little bit more oomph, I think I'd be a lot happier with it. And then Zen Pulse and Zen Reverberation I consider as one thing, mainly because I'm not going to run one without the other. It's situational, it's niche. I don't dislike it, but I'm also not super in love with it. I would not be heartbroken if we don't end up running it, which we won't in a couple of dungeons, just because there's not enough AoE for it to do any real DPS. It will out DPS our Spinning Crane Kick or our Blackout Kick Cleave, and it won't really replace healing without a certain number of mobs. That meaning that it would just be more worth my time to use the Instant Vivify or to stop and channel a Soothing Mist and an Enveloping. Something that I have been a really big fan of lately is the ability to become more tanky if we want to. Right now I am only running Dampen and Diffuse, but if I wanted to I could pick up Fort Brew, and if I really wanted to I could take the shortened duration Fort Brew as well. It is kind of a point sink, but if that is the difference for an example, a boss like Zav, back from Theater of Pain and Shadowlands, I would absolutely be taking the extra defensive if I had access to it. I do really like the freedom of Essence Font as well, in the fact that I don't have to push it if I don't want to. I don't even have it on my bars in this video. It is something that you'll probably end up having on your bars, but it is something that you are not going to push very often. The only situations where I see us using it is when we are all spread out, we have a lot of range, and I want everyone to have the Essence Font hot for that burst AoE healing, or I have used my Faeline, I didn't get a reset if I use it like at a bad time or whatever, and I want everyone to have the hot, or I want to trigger Ancient Teachings, but those are really the only two situations where I see us using it, and I don't have it on my bars here, and I don't really feel a need to. I haven't had it on my bars outside of Raid and Keys. Numbers are ultimately what's going to decide how well this goes, but I think that Mistweaver in its current state on beta is equipped very well for many different types of damage patterns. I haven't felt like mana has been a huge issue. I also feel like we have good agency over whether or not we should use cooldowns or if we can brute force it with just normal healing that we have. So that is something that I really, really like. I don't feel useless outside of cooldowns, and I feel very strong in the cooldowns. The damage patterns that we have seen in the dungeons that we have so far, I feel very comfortable with on Monk. The one exception being the last boss of this dungeon, and that is mainly because we cannot get melee uptime hardly at all. This is a dungeon that I actually considered running Yu'lon in. That is kind of tinfoil at the moment. I haven't brought myself to do that, mainly because I hate that ability. But I could see that realistically being something that we do in here, just because the uptime on the last boss for melee is so minimal. We are still in beta, so I'm a bit hesitant to talk about numbers and values, but I think we're at a fine point to at least be able to discuss it, mainly because we are rapidly approaching release. So I would like to say that I am actually happy with where Mistweaver's damage is. I think that our single target could be a bit higher. We're a little bit lower than all of the others, but in terms of AoE and on overalls, we do represent well. We are competitive, while also being able to keep up in healing as well. I haven't really had any issues with it. Again, I mentioned White Tiger statue earlier, and I wish that that was a little bit more of a cooldown feel, but I overall am pleased with it, and I think that it fits a lot of the dungeons really well. Outside of things like Azure Vaults, I'm not a huge fan of that dungeon so far, as a monk, or as a player in general, but as a whole, I am very happy with where we're at. I also believe that our talents synergize very well with each other. A lot of people were having issue with how many passive abilities that we had, but they are manageable to some point, and if not manageable, then they are at least expected somewhere when one certain thing is happening. So it's less passive, and it's more just something that we don't actually have to push a button for, but our actions do reflect a lot of the times what's happening with the talents. So I don't really have an issue with the passive aspect of it, and I think that all of our talents work very well together, and it provides a very smooth and flowy playstyle. Something I would also like to address, it has been a very hot topic of conversation lately, is Mistweaver versus Fistweaver versus whatever else people are coming up with terms for. Mistweaver is Mistweaver. The way that we play is by being in melee, by extending hots, and then for meaningful triage, we are casting. There isn't a terminology for it, that's just how the class plays. So those terms are very misleading to people, because when you say fist weaving, a lot of the times new monks will be like, oh, all of my healing comes from ancient teachings and from my hots, and I never cast anything. And that's just not true. That's not how it's designed. It's not supposed to carry your single target healing. It's not supposed to carry your AoE healing. It is literally just not designed like that, and it shouldn't be expected to perform well when you're using it improperly. So when you're taking into consideration the whole toolkit that we have in terms of how we heal, how we control mobs, how we do damage, I think that our toolkit is very well put together. I'm a big fan of the tree and how it goes. There's like 2 things that I would maybe swap around, but that's if I'm being picky. As a whole, I am definitely pleased with how our build has been going and how everything works with each other, and generally just how it feels to play. It is very satisfying, it feels very fluid, I don't really feel any kind of clunky bits or anything, and it's not too different from what we're used to, but it is definitely refreshing. Mana has been something that isn't really a concern so far, but I could definitely see it being a problem on some higher tyrannical dungeons. The trash haven't really had any issues with in terms of mana, unless I die and don't get to drink, or someone stands in something and dies and then the fight takes 7 or 8 minutes or whatever, but normal pulls haven't really had any mana issues. Obviously that is subject to change, but that's something that a lot of people have been asking about. I am running Spirit of the Crane. I'm also running Mana Tea, but I haven't really been using Mana Tea. I've been swapping on and off of it, so that one's still a bit up in the air. But overall, haven't really had any problems with mana, and generally not concerned outside of a few high tyrannical dungeons that we will have to wait and see. I'm hoping that I can convince my friends to do some higher keys this week. People have been wanting to do 10s mainly because they're trying new talent builds. My tank in this video hasn't played since like Shadowlands beta, so he was just trying to get back into the swing of things. But I'm hoping that I can get a group together to do some 15s and maybe push a bit further to get a better feel for mana, as well as for how Mistweaver is going to be able to incorporate damage into our rotation. Like I was saying earlier, it feels very fluid, it flows very well, and there isn't really anything that stands out as like, okay, I'm DPSing, whoops, and now I'm healing. It all just kind of feels like one good playstyle, which is really what we were aiming for coming into Dragonflight. I've considered running Gift in here just because of these mobs during the lightning storm. There's quite a bit of damage going out. You can see I don't have my hots out, and I'm not really triaging because I was trying to figure something out with my UI. but these mobs are going to be pretty difficult on either your mana or on your cooldowns, depending on if you decide to run Jade Bond or Gift, or just try to brute force it with normal triaging. Haven't really decided what I want to do with that yet. I'm kind of leaning more towards Gift for this dungeon, mainly because there is a lot of AoE damage going out on the Slaps platform in very short increments. So that is something to consider, but that is also, again, something that we will kind of look into more as we are looking to optimize and less test. These adds are actually very similar to the Shards of Hulkius that we saw in Halls or the Portal Guardians that we saw in Theater of Pain. It is this tantrum type damage that is going out on everybody, and I think that we're very well equipped for this with proper setup. You can see I get a bit lazy because I have GG running, but in a hierarchy you're definitely going to make sure that you want to have Renewing Mist out and everything, but we do handle this type of burst AoE damage pretty well. As kind of an overview, I am very happy with our damage profile. I think that we have pretty good single target damage. It is much better than it is currently in Shadowlands. I also think that our AoE damage is among some of the best, granted tuning pending, but I think that in its current state it is one of the higher, if not the highest, in terms of on-demand AoE damage. For healing, I am a big fan of our healing. I believe that we have high throughput in and out of cooldowns, and that we have the means to cover a lot of different damage profiles. So I'm very excited to see how that ages in terms of mana and in terms of how effectively we are able to triage. And lastly, we have a good amount of utility as well as survivability. They're kind of the same thing, but it is more personal survivability versus survivability for the rest of the group. But having a kick, a stop, a slow, a knockback, we have a sleep available, we have a AoE stun, we have a lot of different tools that allow us to control mobs, as well as control to some extent the amount of damage that's going out, as well as mobs walking into things, certain affixes. I think that we have a very good toolkit across the board for Mythic Plus, and I'm very excited to see how it develops from here. I hope that this video was helpful. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.